When Marcus Bennett signed the deed to the abandoned farmhouse using his last $23 for the processing fee, he never imagined that a loose floorboard in the root cellar would lead to reinforced steel doors bearing the presidential seal. He certainly didn't expect federal agents to surround his property within 12 hours of his discovery, or that the crumbling stone foundation concealed correspondence between 3 U.S. presidents that could fundamentally reshape American history. The classified documents he would uncover weren't just forgotten paperwork, but detailed emergency protocols designed to protect democracy itself during times of crisis. Protocols that powerful defense contractors had spent decades trying to destroy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn wind whipped through the broken windows of the dilapidated farmhouse as Marcus Bennett stood in what had once been a family kitchen. Paint peeled from walls that hadn't seen maintenance in over a decade, and the warped wooden floors creaked ominously under his work boots. At 38, Marcus carried the weight of failure in the slump of his shoulders, a construction business lost to the recession, a teaching career ended by budget cuts, and now a family teetering on the edge of homelessness. His calloused hands clutched the property deed like a lifeline, though most would have called it an anchor, dragging him toward inevitable disaster. "Dad, why does it smell like old socks and sadness?" Emma, his 12-year-old daughter, wrinkled her nose as she peered through the doorway, her younger brother Lucas hiding behind her. The honesty of children cut through Marcus's forced optimism like a blade through tissue paper. Sarah Bennett appeared behind their children, her expression carefully neutral as she surveyed what their life savings had purchased. Once a successful pediatric nurse, she'd left her position to care for Lucas during his bout with childhood leukemia. The medical bills had consumed their savings, their equity, and finally their credit. This abandoned farmhouse, sold by the county for back taxes, represented their last gamble, a desperate attempt to provide stability for their children while Marcus figured out how to rebuild their lives. The Cedar Ridge Valley had once been prime agricultural land, but changing weather patterns and industrial farming had driven most family operations into bankruptcy. The Bennett Heritage Farm, as the faded sign at the property entrance proclaimed, had been in Marcus's family for generations before his grandfather Walter sold it in the early 1970s. Some said the old man had lost his mind in his final years, rambling about protecting American values and presidential duties. Most dismissed these as the fantasies of a veteran whose war experiences had finally caught up with him. Marcus had purchased the property not from nostalgia, but from pragmatic desperation. The 100-acre plot came with a structurally sound, if neglected, house, several outbuildings that could be converted to rental income, and most importantly, it was far enough from their former life that the shame of their financial collapse might not follow them. The 3-hour drive from the city had been silent, except for Lucas's occasional cough, a reminder that his remission remained fragile and expensive. Inside the farmhouse, dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through cracked windows. The previous owners had abandoned the property in haste, leaving behind furniture draped in sheets like ghosts of better times. A stone fireplace dominated the main living area, its mantel carved with peculiar symbols that Marcus didn't recognize. Above it hung a faded photograph of the original farmhouse, standing proud amidst wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. Sarah's practical nature kicked in as she began cataloging necessary repairs. "The roof needs immediate attention," she noted, her trained eye catching details Marcus had missed. "Several floor joists show signs of rot, and I don't even want to think about the state of the plumbing." Her voice carried no accusation, just the weary acceptance of someone who had learned to make the best of diminishing circumstances. There, First week at the farm blurred together in a haze of cleaning, patching, and discovering just how much work their fresh start would require. Marcus threw himself into repairs with the intensity of a man trying to outrun his failures. He replaced broken windows, reinforced sagging steps, and cleared years of debris from the outbuildings. Each small victory felt like a step toward redemption, though the list of necessary improvements seemed to grow rather than shrink. The root cellar had been an afterthought, discovered only when Lucas chased a field mouse behind a tangle of blackberry vines growing against the house's eastern wall. The heavy wooden doors, reinforced with iron bands, suggested the structure predated the main house by several decades. Marcus cleared the entrance more from thoroughness than genuine interest, assuming it would provide storage for Sarah's canning supplies once she got the kitchen garden established. The morning everything changed started like any other. Marcus descended the rough stone steps into the cellar's cool darkness, intent on checking for water damage after the previous night's storm. His flashlight beam swept across empty shelves, mason jars thick with dust, and walls of fieldstone fitted together without mortar. The craftsmanship spoke of a different era, when builders took pride in work meant to last generations. A loose floorboard caught his attention, not unusual in a structure this old, but something about its placement seemed deliberate. The board sat slightly higher than its neighbors, positioned directly beneath a peculiar carving in the overhead beam. Marcus knelt, working his fingers under the edge, surprised when it lifted easily to reveal a metal handle set into a steel plate. His construction experience told him this was no ordinary root cellar feature. The steel was military grade, its surface showing none of the rust that should have accumulated over decades. The handle turned smoothly, triggering a series of mechanical clicks that reverberated through the floor. A section of what Marcus had assumed was solid stone foundation swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing concrete steps descending into darkness. Marcus's heartbeat quickened as he played his flashlight down the stairwell. The construction was clearly government work: poured concrete walls, metal railings, and what appeared to be blast-resistant coating. His mind raced through possibilities. Cold War, fallout shelter, military storage facility, or something more sinister? The air flowing up from below carried no musty scent of long abandonment, but rather the subtle indication of functioning ventilation systems. He should have called Sarah, should have contacted authorities, should have done anything except descend those stairs alone. But something in Marcus's defeated soul responded to the mystery, the possibility that his desperate property purchase might contain something more than abandoned dreams and endless repair bills. His flashlight beam steadied as he made his decision. The stairs led to a reinforced steel door bearing the distinctive seal of the President of the United States. Below it, a brass plaque read, "Lincoln Commission, established 1961, Project American Shield." 3 separate locking mechanisms secured the door, each requiring different keys, though the central lock bore an electronic keypad that seemed anachronistic for a 1960s installation. Marcus stood transfixed, his mind struggling to process the implications. His grandfather Walter had sold this property in 1971, just 10 years after this facility's apparent construction. The old man's rambling speeches about presidential duties suddenly carried new weight. Had Walter known about this bunker? Had he been involved in its creation or maintenance? The electronic keypad blinked steadily, awaiting input. Without thinking, Marcus entered his grandfather's military service number, a sequence drilled into family memory through countless VA hospital visits and benefit applications. The lock clicked open, but the 2 physical locks remained secured. A small screen above the keypad displayed text: "Partial authentication recognized. Bennett family clearance confirmed. 2 additional keys required for full access." Marcus's hands trembled as he photographed the door and its markings. This discovery could change everything for his family. Historically significant finds often came with finder's fees, museum interest, or at minimum, media attention that might help establish the farm as a tourist destination. But he needed proof, needed to know what lay beyond that door before alerting anyone to his discovery. He spent the rest of the morning searching the farmhouse for anything that might serve as keys. His grandfather's belongings had been scattered through estate sales and family divisions decades ago, but the house itself might hold clues. Marcus examined every drawer, checked behind loose baseboards, and even climbed into the attic to search through insulation and rafters. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah found him there, covered in cobwebs and clutching a metal box he'd discovered wedged between roof joists. Her initial irritation at his absence, he'd promised to help Lucas with his homeschool mathematics, faded as she saw his expression. Marcus rarely showed excitement anymore, having learned that hope too often preceded disappointment. But something had lit a spark she hadn't seen since before their troubles began. "You need to see this," he said, leading her to the root cellar. Without explanation, Sarah's gasp when the hidden door swung open validated his own disbelief. Together, they descended to the steel door, where Sarah's medical training kicked in, noting the sophisticated air filtration vents and what appeared to be radiation detection equipment built into the walls. The metal box contained photographs, military commendations, and a leather journal filled with Walter Bennett's cramped handwriting. The final entry, dated just weeks before the farm's sale, resonated with newfound significance. The Commission's work must be preserved. Times change, but the need for safeguards remains constant. I pray my descendants understand their inheritance. When the moment arrives. Among the photographs, one showed Walter in dress uniform, standing beside 3 men in a wood-paneled office. Marcus recognized the setting immediately, the Oval Office. His grandfather, a supposedly simple farmer and veteran, had somehow been involved with presidential-level security protocols. The implications staggered him. As they pored over the journal, trying to decipher Walter's cryptic references to constitutional safeguards and emergency succession protocols, neither noticed the black sedan that pulled onto their property. The first indication of visitors came from Emma's shout from upstairs. "Dad, there's a bunch of people in suits getting out of cars." Marcus reached the front porch in time to see 4 individuals approaching the house. Their leader, a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and an aura of unquestionable authority, held up credentials as she climbed the porch steps. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Agent Rebecca Morrison with the Department of Historical Preservation. We need to discuss your recent discovery." Her tone suggested this wasn't a request. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities of how they could have known. Some kind of silent alarm, satellite surveillance, his partial access to the keypad. "I'm not sure what you mean," he attempted, though his expression betrayed him. "Agent." Morrison's smile held no warmth. "Mr. Bennett, your grandfather's service record includes a classification that triggers immediate notification when accessed. The Lincoln Commission may have been disbanded officially in 1972, but certain protocols remain in effect. May we come in?" As the agents filed into his deteriorating farmhouse, Marcus caught Sarah's eye. Her subtle nod conveyed volumes. "Protect. The children, cooperate carefully, and above all, don't surrender leverage too quickly." Whatever lay behind that steel door, it had already changed their quiet attempt at a new life into something far more complex. Agent Morrison settled onto their threadbare couch as if it were a throne, her associates positioning themselves strategically around the room. "Mr. Bennett, what do you know about your grandfather's service during the Kennedy administration?" "Only that he served," Marcus replied carefully. "He never spoke about specifics. Walter Bennett was recruited in 1961 for a classified project initiated by President Kennedy himself, Morrison explained. Following the Bay of Pigs and escalating Cold War tensions, Kennedy authorized the creation of fail-safe protocols to ensure governmental continuity in case of catastrophic attack or internal coup. Your grandfather was one of 12 individuals selected to maintain secure sites containing critical documents. Sarah interjected, her medical training making her attuned to hidden meanings. You're talking about more than just emergency bunkers, aren't you? Morrison's respect for Sarah's perception showed in her slight nod. The Lincoln Commission was tasked with preserving something more valuable than individual leaders, the constitutional framework itself. Each site contains correspondence between Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, outlining specific protocols for maintaining democratic governance during extraordinary circumstances. And now, Marcus asked, why does this matter decades after the Cold War ended? Morrison's expression darkened. Because certain parties have spent considerable resources trying to locate and destroy these sites. The protocols they contain include provisions that would severely limit the power of private military contractors during national emergencies. Companies that now hold billions in defense contracts have a vested interest in ensuring these documents never see light. As if summoned by her words, the sound of heavy vehicles approaching drew everyone's attention. Through the front window, Marcus watched military-style trucks deploy personnel in tactical gear. These weren't government agents, but private security forces bearing the logo of Sovereign Industries, a name he recognized from news stories about controversial military operations overseas. Agent Morrison's team immediately shifted into defensive positions, hands moving to concealed weapons. They move faster than anticipated, she muttered, pulling out a secure phone. Mr. Bennett, I need you to listen carefully. Sovereign Industries has been tracking commission sites for years. They must have been monitoring our movements, waiting for us to locate an active site. The documents in your bunker represent a direct threat to their expanding influence over national security policy. The front door burst open before she could continue. A man in expensive tactical gear entered, flanked by a legal team that seemed as dangerous as the armed personnel behind them. Agent Morrison, he said smoothly. I'm Harrison Vale, Sovereign Industries Chief Operations Officer. We have a federal judge's order granting us immediate access to this property based on national security concerns. Morrison examined the documentation with obvious skepticism. Judge Thornton, how convenient. His campaign received substantial contributions from your affiliated PACs. Vale's smile remained fixed. The legal system works in mysterious ways. Mr. Bennett, I'm prepared to offer you substantial compensation for this property. Shall we say $10 million? Cash transfer within the hour. The figure stunned Marcus. 10 million would solve every problem his family faced, provide for Lucas's ongoing medical needs, and secure their future. He felt Sarah's hand find his, squeezing gently, not in warning but in support of whatever decision he made. Why? Marcus asked simply. What's in those documents that's worth $10 million to suppress? Vale's mask slipped slightly. That's not your concern, but I'll increase the offer to $15 million, final offer. Your family's struggles are well documented, Mr. Bennett. This windfall could change everything for your children. The mention of his children's struggles, clearly researched and weaponized, sparked something in Marcus that surprised even him. The same quiet rage that had sustained him through business failure, career loss, and his son's cancer battle crystallized into determination. No, he said firmly. Whatever's down there, my grandfather protected it for a reason. It's not for sale. Vale's expression hardened. Then we'll proceed with legal measures. The judge's order grants us access regardless of your cooperation. Stand aside. Morrison stepped forward. Your order is for property inspection related to environmental concerns. It doesn't authorize seizure of historical documents or override federal preservation statutes. As the legal sparring escalated, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs. "Dad, what's happening?" Her voice carried the tremor of a child who'd witnessed too many crisis moments in her young life. The sight of his daughter, brave, resilient, but still fragile from their family's trials, clarified Marcus's path. Whatever choices he made would echo through his children's lives. Did he want them to remember their father as someone who sold out for comfort, or someone who stood for principle when it mattered? "Emma, take your brother to the Mitchell's farm," Marcus instructed, naming their nearest neighbors. "Tell Mrs. Mitchell we're having some property disputes to sort out." As his children departed through the back door, shepherded by one of Morrison's agents for protection, Marcus turned back to the confrontation. Vale had produced a tablet showing bank account numbers and transfer authorizations. The ease with which he could solve their problems with a simple signature felt obscene. "Your grandfather understood duty, Mr. Bennett," Morrison said quietly. "He maintained this site for 40 years, even after the commission officially disbanded. He knew this day might come." Marcus thought of Walter's journal, the cryptic references to constitutional safeguards and emergency succession protocols. His grandfather had sold the farm, but had somehow ensured it would return to family hands when needed. The peculiar terms of the county tax sale, requiring proof of Bennett family lineage, suddenly made sense. "I need to see what's down there," Marcus decided. "Then I'll make my choice." Vale moved to object, but Morrison's team had taken defensive positions around the root cellar entrance. The tactical standoff balanced on a knife's edge, private security forces against federal agents, with Marcus's property rights caught between them. "The secondary keys," Morrison said urgently. "Your grandfather's journal must contain clues. We have perhaps an hour before Sovereign Industries finds a judge willing to issue broader seizure orders." Marcus retrieved the journal, spreading it across the kitchen table as both groups watched warily. Sarah joined him, her analytical mind parsing Walter's careful prose. The old man had written in layers, surface meaning concealing deeper implications. "Here," Sarah pointed to a passage about the farm's boundary markers. "He mentions the Washington stone at the northeast corner where property lines converge. Says it was placed during the original survey, but that doesn't match county records." Another entry referenced the Lincoln oak, supposedly planted to commemorate the Emancipation Proclamation. But Marcus knew the farm's history. His family hadn't owned the land until after World War I. The references were clearly coded. Presidential names, he realized. Washington stone, Lincoln oak. He's indicating locations connected to the commission's work. Vale's impatience manifested in barked orders to his team. Several private security members began setting up what appeared to be electronic surveillance equipment, likely attempting to scan beneath the house for the bunker's full dimensions. Morrison's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Her expression grew grave as she read. Sovereign Industries has teams mobilizing to 2 other states. They're moving on all suspected commission sites simultaneously. If they destroy or seize these documents, crucial evidence about private military influence on public policy disappears forever. The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders. This wasn't just about his family anymore, but about preserving something his grandfather had considered worth a lifetime of secrecy. He grabbed a shovel from the porch, ignoring Vale's protests about property damage. The Washington stone proved to be a granite marker near the property's corner, partially buried under decades of soil accumulation. Marcus dug carefully. aware that both groups watched his every move. 3 feet down, his shovel struck metal. Inside a weatherproof container, he found an ornate key and a letter bearing the presidential seal. The paper, though aged, remained legible. To the faithful guardian of this trust, the bearer of this key has proven their commitment to constitutional principles above personal gain. The protocols contained within were created not for power, but for preservation, ensuring that government of the people shall not perish from this earth. Use wisely, reveal carefully, and remember that democracy's strength lies not in secrecy but in truth properly timed. The signature below belonged to John F. Kennedy. As Marcus held history in his hands, Vail made one final attempt. 25 million, Mr. Bennett. Enough to ensure your son receives the best medical care available, anywhere in the world. Don't let misguided principle endanger your family's future. The offer hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus thought of Lucas's latest test results, the experimental treatments their insurance wouldn't cover, the specialists who might extend his remission indefinitely. He thought of Sarah's sacrifice, leaving her career to become a full-time caregiver. He thought of Emma, brilliant and ambitious, but limited by their financial constraints. Then he thought of his grandfather, maintaining this secret through his own family's struggles, believing some things transcended personal benefit. Agent Morrison, Marcus said finally, I believe we need to open that bunker together. The Lincoln oak stood like a sentinel in the western pasture, its massive trunk scarred by decades of Midwest storms. Marcus approached the ancient tree, with Agent Morrison close behind, while Vail's security team maintained their perimeter around the farmhouse. The standoff had evolved into an uneasy truce, neither side willing to escalate confrontation, while the second key remained unfound. Sarah had stayed at the house ostensibly to gather more clues from Walter's journal, but actually to maintain watch over their property rights, while lawyers from both factions exchanged increasingly heated phone calls with various judges. Marcus circled the oak slowly, running his hands along the deeply grooved bark. Unlike the Washington stone, this hiding place would require more finesse. His grandfather had been meticulous about preserving nature. The man who'd taught him to never harm a living tree wouldn't have carved into this giant. The key had to be concealed in a way that worked with the oak's natural features. Your grandfather visited this tree every Sunday after church, Morrison said, consulting notes on her tablet. According to surveillance reports from the 1960s, he would spend exactly 15 minutes here, regardless of weather. The casual mention of surveillance sent chills down Marcus's spine. His grandfather had lived under government observation for decades, maintaining his secret duty while raising a family and running a farm. The weight of that dedication pressed against Marcus's chest as he searched for any sign of Walter's handiwork. A pattern in the bark caught his attention. What appeared to be natural scarring from an old lightning strike had been subtly modified. The charred groove had been carefully widened at one point, creating a narrow cavity perfect for concealment. But the opening was 20 feet up the trunk, well beyond reach without climbing equipment. He would have needed a way to access it. Regularly, Marcus muttered, studying the tree's configuration. Something that wouldn't attract attention, but would always be available. Morrison glanced back toward the house where Vail's team had set up their command post. We're running out of time. Judge Thornton is in chambers now, reviewing an expanded seizure order. If Sovereign Industries gains legal control of this property... They won't, Marcus interrupted with more confidence than he felt. He'd spotted what he was looking for, a series of naturally occurring burls and knots that formed an almost ladder-like progression up the trunk. They were spaced perfectly for a man of his grandfather's height, worn smooth by decades of use. Marcus began climbing, his work boots finding purchase on the living steps Walter Bennett had used for so many years. The November wind bit at his exposed skin as he ascended, but his focus remained fixed on the lightning scar above. Heights had never bothered him during his construction days, though falling had taken on new meaning since becoming a father. The cavity proved deeper than expected, angling back into the oak's heartwood. Marcus reached in carefully, mindful of spiders or other creatures that might have claimed the space. His fingers found smooth metal, another weatherproof container, this one bearing the presidential seal of Lyndon B. Johnson. Inside, alongside an ornate silver key, lay another letter. This one was longer, more detailed, written in Johnson's distinctive scrawl. The work begun by President Kennedy must continue despite his tragic loss. These protocols represent not paranoia, but prudence. We have seen how quickly democratic institutions can be subverted by those who claim to protect them. The bearer of this key accepts responsibility not just for documents, but for the very framework of our republic. Guard them well, for there may come a time when private power seeks to eclipse public good, when the machinery of war becomes more profitable than the maintenance of peace. As Marcus descended, Morrison relayed updates through her earpiece. Similar scenes were playing out in Vermont and Oregon, where other commission sites had been identified. The coordination suggested sovereign industries had been planning this operation for months, waiting for the right legal pretexts to move simultaneously. Back at the farmhouse, they found Vale in animated conversation with someone he addressed as Senator. The fragments Marcus overheard painted a disturbing picture: emergency legislation being drafted to grant private military contractors expanded domestic authority, justified by manufactured security threats. Sarah met them at the door, Walter's journal clutched in her hands. "I found something," she whispered urgently. "The third key isn't hidden on the property. It's been in plain sight all along." She led them to the fireplace mantel where the peculiar carved symbols had puzzled Marcus since their arrival. What he'd dismissed as decorative flourishes now revealed themselves as a combination lock built into the stonework itself. The symbols corresponded to entries in Walter's journal, a cipher hidden within his rambling stories about farm life. He wrote about the seasons, Sarah explained, manipulating the carved pieces in sequence, but the dates don't match actual weather patterns. They're a code, specific moments in American history when constitutional crises threatened democratic governance. The final symbol clicked into place, and a section of stone swung inward to reveal a small chamber. Inside sat a crystal key unlike the others, its facets catching the afternoon light. Beside it lay one final letter, this one bearing Richard Nixon's seal, but written in a different hand. The Commission's work concludes with this administration, but its purpose endures. The documents secured within these sites detail contingency plans that some would consider extreme, provisions for maintaining civilian governance when private military forces exceed constitutional bounds. The bearer of these keys inherits not power but obligation. Choose wisely when to reveal these truths, for timing determines whether they preserve or destroy. Morrison's expression grew troubled as she read over Marcus's shoulder. This suggests the protocols go beyond what we understood. If Nixon felt compelled to maintain the commission despite his own complications, the contents must be extraordinarily sensitive. Vale had ended his phone call and now approached with renewed confidence. "Mr. Bennett, I'll make one final offer. $50 million plus guaranteed medical care for your son at any facility worldwide for life. Additionally, full scholarships for both children at universities of their choosing. All we ask is that you step aside and let proper authorities handle whatever historical curiosities your grandfather preserved." The figure was staggering, more money than Marcus had imagined possible. He could see Sarah's sharp intake of breath, the way her fingers tightened on his arm. 50 million would erase every nightmare that had haunted them since Lucas's diagnosis. It would restore the life they'd lost and secure their children's futures beyond their wildest dreams. But Marcus also saw the calculation in Vale's eyes, the predatory patience of someone accustomed to buying outcomes. If Sovereign Industries was willing to pay 50 million to suppress these documents, their actual value, or threat, must be exponentially greater. Define proper authorities, Marcus said finally. Vale's smile was practiced, professional. Sovereign Industries maintains contracts with multiple federal agencies. We're better equipped than bureaucrats to evaluate and secure sensitive historical materials. You mean destroy them, Morrison interjected, just as your predecessors did with commission sites in Florida and Michigan in the 1980s. Historical preservation isn't your mandate. It's profit through permanent warfare, unconstrained by constitutional oversight. The accusation hung in the air as Marcus weighed his options. Through the window, he could see neighbors beginning to gather along the property line. Word of the standoff had spread through Cedar Ridge Valley's tight-knit community. Old farmers who'd known his grandfather, younger families struggling with the same economic pressures that had driven the Bennetts to desperation, all drawn by the unprecedented sight of federal agents and private military forces facing off on a family farm. Among them, Marcus spotted David Mitchell, whose farm bordered their property. The man caught his eye and raised a fist in solidarity. Others nodded or waved, their presence a reminder that this wasn't just about the Bennett family anymore. The community had watched too many farms fall to corporate interests, too many families driven from land their ancestors had worked for generations. "I need to make a phone call," Marcus announced, pulling out his cell phone. Vale's expression darkened. "To whom?" "My children. If I'm making a decision that affects their future, they deserve to understand why." Before Vale could object, Marcus had dialed the Mitchell farm. Emma answered on the second ring, her voice tight with worry. In the background, he could hear Lucas coughing, the persistent reminder of how precarious their situation remained. "Dad, is everything okay? Mrs. Mitchell says there are military trucks at our house." Marcus chose his words carefully, aware that every faction in the room was listening. "Emma, you remember the stories Great-Grandpa Walter used to tell about duty and doing what's right even when it's hard? The one about the farmer who saved his neighbor's cow during the flood, even though he lost his own crop trying? That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to think beyond ourselves. I need you to understand that whatever happens today, your mom and I are trying to do what Great-Grandpa would have wanted, what's right for everyone, not just our family." There was a pause. Then Emma's voice came back stronger. "Lucas says, to tell you we understand. He says Great-Grandpa's in heaven watching, and he'd be proud." The simple faith in his children's response nearly broke Marcus's composure. He ended the call and turned back to the waiting factions, his decision crystallized by the trust in his daughter's voice. "We open the bunker," he announced. "All 3 keys, proper authorization. Then we see what my grandfather spent 40 years protecting before anyone decides its fate." Vale's team immediately began raising objections, citing legal precedents and security concerns. Morrison's agents moved to defensive positions around the root cellar entrance, but Marcus had already started walking, the 3 keys clutched in his hands like talismans. Sarah fell into step beside him, her fingers intertwining with his. "Ah, you sure?" she whispered. 50 million, Marcus. Lucas's treatments, the children's education, would mean nothing if we couldn't look them in the eye," he finished. "Whatever's down there, Grandpa believed it was worth more than money, worth more than comfort. We have to trust that." The crowd of neighbors had grown, forming a human barrier between the government vehicles and the farmhouse. Their presence created an unexpected dynamic. Any aggressive action by either faction would play out before dozens of witnesses, many recording with their phones. Rural solidarity had transformed a private conflict into a community stand. In the root cellar, the hidden door stood open, revealing the concrete steps and the steel barrier below. The presidential seal gleamed in the beam of Marcus's flashlight as the various factions crowded into the confined space. The electronic keypad awaited input, its steady blink marking time like a digital heartbeat. Marcus entered his grandfather's. Service number again, then inserted the 3 keys in sequence: brass for Kennedy, silver for Johnson, crystal for Nixon. Each lock disengaged with a distinct mechanical sound, but the door remained sealed. A new message appeared on the keypads. Screen final authorization required. Speak the constitutional oath. Morrison stepped back, her expression puzzled. The oath of office, but which version? The presidential oath differs from standard federal service. Neither, Sarah interrupted, her medical training in pattern recognition suddenly relevant. Look at the journal's final entry. Walter wrote about the oath that binds all Americans, not just their leaders. Marcus understood. His grandfather, the quiet farmer who'd served his country in ways few could imagine, had designed the ultimate test of civic commitment. He cleared his throat and spoke the words every school child once learned. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The steel door's locks disengaged with a sound like distant thunder. Pneumatic seals released, and the massive barrier swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a chamber that defied the bunker's 1960s origins. The room beyond was climate-controlled, LED lighting, and filled with technology that seemed impossibly advanced for its supposed age. But it was the walls that drew every eye. Floor-to-ceiling filing systems contained not just documents but photographs, tape recordings, and what appeared to be early computer data storage devices. At the chamber's center sat a conference table surrounded by 12 chairs, one for each original commission member. And at the head of the table, sealed in a transparent case like a museum exhibit, lay a thick folder marked with all 3 presidential seals. Morrison moved first, her credentials apparently granting her certain authorities even Vail couldn't challenge. She approached the sealed case with near reverence, studying the locking mechanism that protected the folder within. Biometric locks, she reported, but not for fingerprints or retinal scans. This requires something else. Lai. Marcus joined her, noting a small panel beside the case marked with a medical caduceus symbol. Sarah's intake of breath suggested she recognized something the others had missed. Blood type verification, she said quietly. The commission members must have provided biological samples for matching, but that technology wasn't available in the 1960s. The bunker's been upgraded, Vail observed, his corporate instincts engaged despite the situation. Someone's maintained and modernized this facility well beyond the commission's official termination. Marcus thought of his grandfather's Sunday visits to the Lincoln Oak, the mysterious resources that had allowed him to keep the farm during economic downturns that crushed his neighbors. Had Walter been part of a continuing network, secretly maintaining commission sites with support from unknown benefactors? The blood match won't work, Morrison said, unless one of the original commission members is present. Try it, Marcus interrupted, rolling up his sleeve. Something in his grandfather's journal, a passage about inheritance beyond property, suggested Walter had prepared for this possibility. Morrison looked skeptical, but gestured to Sarah, whose medical training included phlebotomy. Using supplies from the bunker's surprisingly well-stocked medical kit, Sarah drew a small blood sample and applied it to the panel's sensor pad. The chamber filled with a soft hum as systems activated. The case's seals released with a hydraulic hiss, and the protective cover retracted to reveal the folder within. Embossed on its cover were the words, Constitutional Safeguard Protocols, Executive Emergency Orders 1961-1969, Chain of Succession Beyond Compromise. Before anyone could react, Vale's team moved with military precision. 2 operators flanked the doorway while their commander spoke rapidly into a satellite phone. The pretense of legal authority evaporated as weapons appeared from beneath tactical clothing. "Step away from the documents," Vale ordered, his corporate executive mask finally discarded. "This facility is now under sovereign industry's control, pending national security review." Morrison's agents responded instantly, creating a protective formation around the conference table. The enclosed space crackled with tension as opposing forces faced off, fingers hovering near triggers. Marcus found himself trapped between them. Sarah pressed against his side as the situation spiraled toward violence. "Sovereign Industries has no legal authority here," Morrison stated flatly. "This is a federal historical site containing protected documents. Stand down immediately." Vale's laugh was harsh. "Federal authority derives from enforcement capability. Check your communications, Agent Morrison. Your support teams have been redirected to false locations. No backup is coming." Morrison's expression confirmed the truth of his claim. Whatever influence Sovereign Industries wielded had effectively isolated her team. In a direct confrontation, superior numbers and firepower would determine the outcome. "50 million was generous, Mr. Bennett," Vale continued, "but we're past negotiations now. These documents threaten corporate contracts worth hundreds of billions. The private military industry won't allow Cold War paranoia to undermine legitimate business interests." Through the chaos, Marcus noticed something others had missed. The bunker's systems were still responding to his presence. Panels had illuminated when he approached, locks disengaged at his touch. His grandfather hadn't just preserved documents, he'd integrated family biology into the security protocols themselves. Moving slowly to avoid triggering confrontation, Marcus placed his hand on the table's surface. A holographic display materialized, projecting documents into the air above the folder. The first page appeared in glowing text. "By executive order of 3 duly elected presidents of the United States, these protocols establish constitutional mechanisms for preserving democratic governance during periods of extra-legal military influence on civilian authority. When private armies exceed the power of public institutions, these measures ensure the continuation of government by, for, and of the people." The implications were staggering. The documents outlined specific scenarios where private military contractors could subvert democratic processes and detailed countermeasures to prevent such takeovers. Most dramatically, they established a shadow network of civilian authorities who could assume governmental functions if traditional structures were compromised by corporate military power. Vale's face had gone pale. These weren't just historical curiosities, but active protocols that could dissolve Sovereign Industries' carefully constructed influence over defense policy. The company's entire business model, providing military services while lobbying for conflicts that required those services, would crumble if these safeguards were implemented. "Destroy everything," Vale commanded his team. Full sanitation, your protocol, but Marcus was already moving, his construction experience reading the bunker's design like blueprints. His hand found an emergency panel Walter had marked with farm symbols, a harvest moon beside a flowering cornstalk. The panel concealed a master control that his grandfather had installed during one of his maintenance visits. As Vale's team raised their weapons, Marcus activated the bunker's final safeguard. Steel barriers slammed down over the entrance, sealing everyone inside. Emergency lighting bathed the chamber in red as ventilation systems engaged, ensuring breathable air during lockdown. Wall panels opened to reveal communications equipment that began broadcasting on frequencies Marcus didn't recognize. Dead man. Protocol activated, an automated voice announced. Commission documents uploading to secure servers. Congressional override committees notified. Media outlets receiving authenticated copies. Constitutional safeguard protocols entering public domain in accordance with Executive Orders 11-1593, 11-1921, and 12-334. Vale lunged for the control panel, but Morrison's team intercepted him. The brief struggle ended with corporate mercenaries and federal agents in standoff, weapons drawn, but neither side willing to fire first in the enclosed space. Sarah had moved to one of the communication stations, her quick intelligence passing. The system's operations, the bunkers broadcasting everything, she reported, not just documents but audio and video of what's happening here. It's going live to every major news network, streaming platforms, and government accountability office simultaneously. On the screens surrounding them, the outside world watched the drama unfold. The neighbors gathered at the property line had been joined by arriving media trucks. Social media exploded with leaked images of the standoff, the presidential documents, and most damningly, Vale's recorded order to destroy historical evidence. Marcus stood at the center of it all, finally understanding his grandfather's greatest gift. Walter hadn't just preserved documents, he'd created a system that would reveal them at precisely the moment when private military influence peaked. The technology upgrades, the biological locks, the automated broadcasting, all designed to ensure these safeguards reached the public before they could be suppressed. "You've destroyed yourselves," Vale snarled, his composure shattered. "Sovereign Industries provides essential services to national security. Without private military contractors, America's global influence collapses." America existed before companies like yours turned war into profit margins, Morrison countered. "These protocols don't eliminate private contractors. They establish oversight to prevent them from becoming shadow governments." Through the bunker's cameras, Marcus watched the scene outside transform. Military vehicles appeared, but not corporate ones. These bore official Department of Defense markings. The automated broadcasts had triggered response protocols Vale hadn't anticipated, bringing legitimate authorities to secure the site. Federal marshals entered through the unsealed entrance, their presence immediately shifting the power dynamic. The standoff dissolved as Vale's team was disarmed and detained, their corporate immunity evaporating in the face of documented evidence of attempted destruction of government property. As order restored itself, Marcus found himself sitting at the conference table where 3 presidents had once debated democracy's future. The folder lay open before him, its contents now being digitized and distributed to secure archives worldwide. His grandfather's 40-year vigil had ended with perfect timing, revealing these safeguards just as private military influence reached unprecedented levels. Sarah joined him, her hand finding his beneath the table. "No 50 million, she said, softly. "No guaranteed treatments for Lucas. No easy answers to our problems." Marcus squeezed her fingers, feeling the weight of their choice. "But our children can look us in the eye. They'll know their parents chose principle over profit when it mattered most." Morrison approached, her professional mask softened by genuine respect. "Mr. Bennett, the historical significance of your decision today cannot be overstated. These protocols will reshape the relationship between private military power and democratic governance. Your grandfather would be proud." Through the bunker's monitors, Marcus watched the crowd outside his farm continue to grow. Neighbors who'd supported his family's stand were being interviewed by reporters, their rural voices carrying truths about corporate influence that urban politics often missed. The drought-stricken valley had become the unlikely epicenter of a national revelation about power, democracy, and the ordinary citizens who sometimes determined history's course. As federal investigators began the methodical process of cataloging the bunker's contents, Marcus noticed one document Morrison had set aside, a personal letter from Walter Bennett to his descendants, sealed with instructions to open only after the protocols were revealed. With trembling hands, Marcus broke the seal and read his grandfather's final message. "To my family who chose duty over comfort, the easy path would have been silence, selling these secrets to the highest bidder, or letting them fade into obscurity. But democracy requires citizens who value principle above profit, community above comfort. I maintained this trust, not knowing which generation would face the choice, only that someday private power would grow bold enough to challenge public good openly. The real treasure isn't in these documents, but in the character that led you to reveal them. Your children will face their own tests of citizenship. May they learn from your example that wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the integrity of one's choices and the health of one's community. The farm endures, the family endures, the republic endures. Each generation must decide what legacy matters most." Marcus felt tears on his cheeks as he finished reading. Through the bunker's cameras, he saw his children approaching with the Mitchells, Emma holding Lucas's hand protectively as they navigated the crowd. Federal agents cleared a path for them, and soon his family was reunited in the underground chamber where American democracy had been quietly preserved for half a century. "Dad," Emma asked, her eyes wide as she took in the historic scene, "are we in trouble?" Marcus lifted his daughter into an embrace, feeling Lucas wrap his arms around his waist. Sarah completed their circle, and for a moment, the weight of their decisions lifted. "No, sweetheart," he answered. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be." As investigators continued their work and media outlets broadcast the implications of the constitutional safeguard protocols, the Bennett family stood together in the heart of their unexpected inheritance. They'd chosen democracy over dollars, community over comfort, exactly as Walter Bennett had hoped some descendant would when the moment arrived. The drought would continue for now, their financial struggles would persist, and Lucas would still need expensive treatments. But they'd face the test of citizenship their grandfather had prepared for them, and they'd passed it together. In the end, that mattered more than all the corporate millions in the world. Outside, the first drops of unexpected rain began to fall on Cedar Ridge Valley, as if nature itself approved of choices made not for profit, but for principle. The farm would endure. The family would endure. And because of one desperate father's decision to trust inherited wisdom over immediate gain, perhaps the republic would endure as well. The rain intensified throughout the night, transforming Cedar Ridge Valley's parched earth into muddy pools that reflected the emergency lights still surrounding the Bennett farm. By morning, what had begun as a desperate search for water had evolved into a national conversation about private military influence on American democracy. News vans lined the country road, their satellite dishes pointed skyward as reporters broadcast live from what they dubbed Democracy Farm. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching federal investigators carry sealed evidence boxes from the bunker to waiting trucks. Each container held documents that mapped the careful erosion of civilian oversight by corporate military interests. A paper trail 3 presidents had deemed important enough to hide, and one grandfather had considered worth preserving for decades. The coffee in Marcus's mug had long gone cold, but he barely noticed, his mind still processing the magnitude of their discovery. Sarah entered quietly, her hospital scrubs indicating she planned to return to work despite the chaos surrounding their home. In the weeks since revealing the bunker, St. Mary's Medical Center had offered her a position in their pediatric ward. News of the Bennett family's sacrifice for principle had resonated throughout the community, generating unexpected support. Director Chen is in the living room, she said, adjusting her stethoscope. She wants to discuss the transition team's findings. Patricia Chen had arrived 3 days earlier, leading a special commission tasked with implementing the constitutional safeguard protocols. Unlike the initial confrontation with Morrison and Vale, Chen's approach emphasized transparency and collaboration. Her team included constitutional scholars, military historians, and citizen advocates, a deliberate mix designed to prevent any single interest from dominating the process. Marcus found Chen examining the family photographs lining the mantel, particularly one showing Walter Bennett in his army uniform standing beside a young Marcus at a 4th of July parade. The director's expression suggested she saw more than just a family snapshot in the image. Your grandfather was photographed at 17 different commission sites over 36 years, Chen said without turning. Always in civilian clothes, always during what appeared to be routine travel. We've identified at least 8 other individuals who maintained similar patterns. A shadow network of citizens protecting democracy's insurance policy. She finally faced Marcus, her dark eyes carrying the weight of discoveries still being processed. The protocols your grandfather helped preserve go beyond military contractor oversight. They establish mechanisms for reconstituting government function if traditional structures fail. Contingency plans that assume threats to democracy might come from within rather than without. The implications sent a chill through Marcus, despite the warm kitchen air. You're talking about more than just private armies exceeding their authority. The Commission anticipated scenarios we're only now beginning to understand, Chen confirmed. Corporate capture of regulatory agencies, media consolidation eliminating diverse viewpoints, electoral systems compromised by private funding. Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon saw it all coming. They created safeguards not just against military, but against democracy's slow suffocation by concentrated private power. Through the window, Marcus watched Emma and Lucas boarding their school bus, federal protective agents discreetly following in an unmarked sedan. The children's lives had transformed overnight from anonymous struggle to protected visibility. The irony wasn't lost on him. By choosing principle over profit, they'd gained security their poverty could never have purchased. Sovereign Industries filed for bankruptcy yesterday, Chen continued. Their stock collapsed when the protocols revealed how extensively they'd infiltrated defense procurement processes. But they're not the real concern anymore. Marcus raised an eyebrow, waiting for elaboration. The documents reference something called the Continuity Coalition, a network of corporate interests that transcends individual companies. Sovereign was just one tentacle of something much larger. Chen pulled out her tablet, showing Marcus a complex organizational chart. Energy companies, media conglomerates, pharmaceutical giants, tech monopolies, all connected through shared board members and coordinated lobbying efforts. The scope was staggering. According to the Commission's research, this coalition had been quietly consolidating power since the 1970s, using legitimate business practices to create dependencies that government couldn't easily break. They hadn't planned a dramatic coup, but rather a gradual assumption of functions traditionally managed by elected officials. My grandfather knew, Marcus said, understanding finally dawning. That's why he maintained such strict secrecy, why the reveal required such specific conditions. He was waiting for the coalition to become visible enough that exposing it wouldn't seem like paranoid conspiracy. Chen nodded. The protocols include detailed evidence of coalition activities dating back decades, financial transactions, meeting records, strategic plans, But more importantly, they establish legal frameworks for dismantling such concentrated power without destroying the legitimate economy. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Marcus opened it to find David, Mitchell, and several other neighbors, their weather-beaten faces carrying expressions of determined solidarity. Behind them, more vehicles were arriving, not media or government, but locals from throughout Cedar Ridge Valley. "Thought you might need some support today," Mitchell said, his calloused hand firm on Marcus's shoulder. "Word is, there's going to be another attempt to challenge the protocol's legitimacy. Some high-powered lawyers landed at the county airport this morning." The farmyard soon filled with neighbors, their presence creating a human buffer between the Bennett home and any potential confrontation. These were people who understood struggle, who'd watched corporate interests hollow out their communities for decades. The Bennett family's choice resonated with their own desires to preserve something beyond profit margins. Chen observed the gathering with interest. "This is what the coalition never understood," she said quietly. "They calculated political influence and media control, but ignored the power of community solidarity. Your grandfather knew better. That's why he tied the protocols to family land, to roots that run deeper than corporate structures." As if summoned by her words, a convoy of black luxury vehicles approached along the country road. Unlike Vale's military-style arrival, these cars projected legal rather than physical threat. The lead vehicle bore diplomatic plates, suggesting international implications to whatever challenge was coming. The man who emerged looked more like a university professor than a corporate warrior. Silver-haired and impeccably dressed, he approached, with the confident stride of someone accustomed to boardrooms and judicial chambers. His entourage included what appeared to be attorneys from multiple international firms. "Mr. Bennett, I'm Carlton Blackwood, representing the Global Strategic Council. We need to discuss the international ramifications of your recent revelations." Marcus felt Chen tense beside him. Apparently, this visit wasn't entirely unexpected. "The Global Strategic Council," Blackwood continued smoothly, "represents legitimate business interests across 43 nations. The protocols you've exposed threaten to destabilize carefully balanced international agreements. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for your cooperation in containing this situation." The offer differed from Vale's crude attempt at bribery. Blackwood spoke of educational foundations, medical research endowments, and community development funds, sophisticated incentives designed to transform the entire Cedar Ridge Valley. The Bennett family could become philanthropists rather than simply wealthy, their sacrifice reframed as regional leadership. "Interesting," Marcus said carefully. "And what exactly would our cooperation entail?" Blackwood's smile reminded Marcus of expensive lawyers who'd once explained why bankruptcy was his family's only option. Simply acknowledging that while historically significant, these protocols reflect Cold War paranoia rather than contemporary reality. Private enterprise has evolved considerably since the 1960s. Modern corporate governance includes safeguards the Commission couldn't have anticipated. The neighbors had drawn closer, forming a loose circle around the conversation. Their presence created unspoken pressure. Whatever decision Marcus made would reflect on the entire community. Sarah had returned from the house, her hospital shift apparently postponed. She studied Blackwood with the clinical detachment she used when diagnosing difficult cases. "You're not really here about the protocols, are you? This is about something specific they threaten." Blackwood's composure flickered slightly. "The documents reference certain international agreements that, if misinterpreted, could disrupt global stability. We're simply seeking to provide appropriate context." Chen stepped forward. The Zurich Accords of 1987, she said flatly, secret agreements establishing corporate arbitration systems that supersede national courts. The protocols declare such arrangements unconstitutional when they involve military contractors. The revelation sent murmurs through the gathered crowd. Marcus thought of his grandfather's journal entries about justice for sale and courts that answer to stockholders. The old farmer had understood more about international finance than anyone suspected. The Zurich Accords facilitate global commerce, Blackwood countered smoothly. They prevent trade wars and ensure stable international relations. Undermining them based on 60-year-old documents would be catastrophically irresponsible. But Mitchell spoke up from the crowd, his farmer's directness cutting through diplomatic language. Stable for who? My soybeans can't compete with corporate. Farms using subsidized water rights negotiated in private tribunals. Thompson's Dairy went under fighting environmental standards that exempted multinational competitors. Stability that only benefits the already powerful isn't stability, it's exploitation. Other neighbors voiced similar experiences. Local businesses destroyed by regulations that mysteriously exempted international corporations. Family operations unable to compete with entities that seemed to operate above national law. The Zurich Accords, whatever their original intent, had created a parallel legal system that favored size over justice. Blackwood's expression hardened as he realized his sophisticated arguments weren't finding purchase among people who'd lived with their consequences. Mr. Bennett, I urge you to consider the broader implications. The world economy depends on predictable international frameworks. These protocols could trigger a cascade of legal challenges that would create chaos in global markets. Or restore accountability, Chen interjected. The Commission anticipated exactly this situation, private interests becoming so entangled with government function that challenging them would seem to threaten stability itself. But that's precisely when challenge becomes most necessary. The sound of approaching helicopters interrupted the debate. Military aircraft circled the farm at a respectful distance, not threatening, but clearly monitoring the situation. The federal government was taking no chances with whatever Blackwood's organization might attempt. Lucas appeared at the farmhouse door, his thin frame wrapped in the oversized sweater Sarah insisted he wear during treatment weeks. The boy's presence shifted the conversation's dynamic, reminding everyone that abstract principles had human consequences. "Dad!" Lucas called. "Emma says to tell you the computers in the bunker are doing something weird. She thinks someone's trying to hack them remotely." Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. Emma had been helping catalog digital files in the bunker, her technical skills proving invaluable to Chen's team if someone was attempting cyber infiltration. Chen was already moving, speaking rapidly into her secure phone. Within minutes, cybersecurity specialists emerged from one of the government trailers, heading for the bunker entrance. The violation of digital security constituted a federal crime that even Blackwood's legal team couldn't smooth over. "I had nothing to do with any hacking attempt," Blackwood said quickly, his first show of genuine concern. "The council operates entirely within legal boundaries." But his protest rang hollow as reports filtered back from the bunker. Someone had launched a sophisticated attack on the Commission's servers, attempting to corrupt files before they could be fully analyzed. The attack's origin pointed to servers in multiple countries, a distributed assault that suggested resources beyond any single corporation. As federal agents questioned Blackwood's team, Marcus found himself drawn back to the bunker, the underground. Chamber had transformed into a high-tech command center with specialists working to preserve and analyze decades of carefully maintained records. Emma sat at one of the workstations, her young face focused as she helped trace the cyber attacks' digital fingerprints. "The attack pattern is really weird, Dad," she reported without looking up from her screens. "It's not trying to steal information, it's trying to alter it. Specifically, dates and signatures on key documents, like someone wants to make the protocol seem forged or backdated." The sophistication suggested resources beyond ordinary, corporate espionage. Marcus thought of Chen's warnings about the Continuity Coalition, networks that transcended individual companies or even industries. If such coordination existed, it might explain how private power had grown influential, enough to require the extraordinary safeguards his grandfather had protected. Chen appeared beside him, her expression grim. "We've identified similar attacks on commission sites in Vermont and Oregon. Someone's attempting to undermine the protocol's authenticity before full implementation becomes politically unstoppable." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The very coordination required for such attacks validated the Commission's concerns about concentrated private power. By trying to suppress the evidence, the coalition was demonstrating exactly why the safeguards were necessary. "What about the Zurich Accords?" Marcus asked. Blackwood seemed specifically concerned about those. Chen pulled up files on a nearby screen. "The Accords establish arbitration panels that operate outside national judicial systems. Corporations can challenge government regulations through these panels, with rulings that bind countries to compliance or face massive penalties. It's created a shadow legal system where private interests often override public policy." She highlighted specific cases: environmental protections nullified because they threatened profit margins, labor standards deemed trade barriers, public health measures challenged as restraints on commerce. The pattern was clear. Democracy's ability to regulate corporate behavior had been systematically undermined through international agreements negotiated without public input. The protocols establish that such agreements are invalid when they compromise national sovereignty, Chen explained. If fully implemented, every decision made by these arbitration panels could face constitutional challenge. Trillions of dollars in corporate advantages would evaporate overnight. The scope of potential change staggered Marcus. His decision to preserve his grandfather's secret had implications reaching far beyond military contractors or defense policy. The entire architecture of global corporate power faced potential restructuring. Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom system. "Marcus, you need to see what's happening outside, now." They emerged from the bunker to find the farm, surrounded by an even larger crowd. But these weren't just neighbors anymore. Buses had arrived from neighboring counties carrying farmers, small business owners, and workers from industries decimated by international competition. Word of the protocols and their potential to level playing fields tilted toward multinational corporations had spread through social media faster than traditional news could contain it. Signs dotted the crowd: democracy, not oligarchy; fair trade, not fixed trade; restore American sovereignty. The gathering had spontaneously evolved from local support to regional movement. People who'd felt powerless against global economic forces suddenly saw possibility in documents hidden beneath a struggling farm. Blackwood's entourage was loading into their vehicles, their legal challenges apparently postponed in the face of unexpected public mobilization. The sophisticated attorney approached Marcus one final time, his diplomatic mask slipping to reveal something almost like respect. "You have no idea what you've started," Blackwood said quietly. "The structures you're challenging took decades to build. They won't crumble without consequence. Markets will fluctuate, currencies will destabilize, international relationships will require complete renegotiation. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" Marcus thought of his grandfather maintaining secret protocols through personal hardship because he believed democracy required protection from concentrated power. He thought of his children, inheriting a world where corporate influence seemed insurmountable. He thought of his neighbors, whose livelihoods had been sacrificed to trade agreements they'd never voted on. "My grandfather prepared for it," Marcus answered. "He believed American democracy was resilient enough to reclaim its sovereignty from private interests. I guess we're about to find out if he was right." Blackwood nodded slowly, then surprised Marcus by extending his hand. "For what it's worth, I admire your conviction. Not many would choose principle over the comfort we offered. Your grandfather selected his successor well." As the convoy departed, Director Chen addressed the growing crowd through a hastily arranged sound system. She explained the protocols in plain language, not as abstract legal concepts, but as practical tools for communities to reclaim decision-making power from distant boardrooms. The response was electric, hope spreading through people who'd felt economically marginalized for decades. But Chen also warned of challenges ahead. Implementation would require careful legal process, political courage, and public vigilance. Corporate interests wouldn't surrender advantages without a fight. International relationships would need renegotiation. The transition from shadow oligarchy to transparent democracy would test American institutions in unprecedented ways. As she spoke, Marcus noticed federal agents escorting several individuals from Blackwood's departed team back from their vehicles. The cyber attack investigation had apparently yielded immediate results. Whatever the Global Strategic Council's official position on legal methods, some members had clearly decided to pursue more direct action. Emma emerged from the bunker, her face flushed with excitement. "Dad, we traced the hack attempt." It came from a server farm in Switzerland, the same city where those accords were signed. The feds are coordinating with international authorities to shut it down and preserve evidence. The irony was perfect. Agreements designed to place corporate interests above national law were being challenged, using evidence gathered through international law enforcement cooperation. The world order wasn't as rigidly stratified as the coalition assumed. As afternoon faded toward evening, the crowd gradually dispersed, though many promised to return for a planned community meeting. The Bennetts found themselves alone for the first time in days, gathered around their kitchen table as they'd been when this journey began. But everything had changed. Their desperate circumstances had catalyzed a national awakening to democracy's quiet subversion. The medical center. "Hold," Sarah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "They're offering me a full-time position with benefits. Apparently, our story has inspired several anonymous donations to their pediatric oncology program." Lucas perked up at this news. His treatments had been a constant source of financial stress, even with community support. Stable insurance coverage would transform their situation more effectively than any corporate bribe. "And Principal Harrison wants to talk about accelerated programs for Emma," Sarah continued. "Universities are already expressing interest in a student who helped trace international cyber attacks at age 12. The opportunities emerging from their choice to reveal the protocols exceeded anything sovereign industries or the Global Strategic Council had offered. By choosing public good over private gain, they discovered that community support could provide what corporate money couldn't: sustainable security built on shared values rather than purchased silence. Chen knocked at the door, entering with a final update before returning to Washington. The President addresses Congress tomorrow about implementing the protocols. He's proposing a constitutional amendment to prevent future erosion of democratic oversight by private interests. Your grandfather's vision might become permanent law. She placed a leather-bound journal on the table, Walter Bennett's personal diary from his final years. "We found this in a safety deposit box linked to one of his alias identities. He wanted his family to have it once the protocols were revealed. Fair warning, it contains revelations about coalition activities that go beyond what we've discussed." After Chen departed, Marcus opened the journal with trembling hands. His grandfather's familiar script filled page after page with observations, concerns, and hope for future generations. The final entry, dated just weeks before Walter's death, spoke directly to whoever would eventually expose the hidden protocols. To my descendant who chose democracy over comfort, the easy path leads to personal wealth but collective servitude. The hard path, the one you've chosen, leads through controversy to freedom. The coalition will challenge you with sophistication and resources beyond imagination. They'll paint you as naive idealists, threatening prosperity and stability. Remember this, democracy isn't efficient. It's not meant to be. It's messy, contentious, and sometimes gridlocked because it represents diverse interests rather than unified power. The coalition promises streamlined decision-making and economic optimization, but efficiency in service of oligarchy is still tyranny. The protocols aren't perfect solutions. They're tools for citizens to reclaim their voice in governance. Use them wisely. Some corporate influence serves legitimate purposes. Innovation requires investment. Global trade needs coordination. The goal isn't destroying private enterprise, but preventing its dominion over public policy. Your choice today creates ripples that will spread for generations. Some will praise your courage, others condemn your disruption of profitable systems. Stay focused on the principle that guided the Commission. Government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed, not the influence of the wealthy. The farm endures because it's rooted in something deeper than profit, commitment to land, family, and community. Democracy endures when citizens value it more than personal advantage. You've proven worthy of both inheritances. Watch for coalition adaptation. They're patient strategists who plan in decades, not election cycles. But remember, concentrated power ultimately fails because it cannot inspire what democracy achieves. Ordinary people choosing public good over private interest. The work continues. The struggle between oligarchy and democracy never truly ends. But today, you've tipped the balance toward we the people. With love and pride, Grandpa Marcus closed the journal, feeling the weight of generational responsibility. Around the table, his family sat in contemplative silence, each processing their role in this unexpected chapter of American history. Lucas, despite his youth, seemed to grasp the significance. "We're going to be in history books, aren't we?" the boy asked. "Maybe," Marcus replied. "But that's not what matters. What matters is that other families won't face the choices we did, between healthcare and homelessness, between principles and poverty." Grandpa's gift wasn't just the protocols. It was the reminder that democracy requires citizens willing to defend it. Emma, wise beyond her years, added, "And now we have to help implement them properly. The coalition won't give up easily. They'll try to water down the protocols, create loopholes, or wait until people stop paying attention." Sarah nodded. "Vigilance is the price of democracy. Someone said that, right?" "Thomas Jefferson, supposedly," Marcus said. Though historians debate the exact quote, the point remains: maintaining freedom requires constant effort from engaged citizens. As night fell over Cedar Ridge Valley, the Bennett family sat together, no longer desperate but determined. Their accidental discovery had evolved into purposeful action. Their personal crisis had sparked national reformation. The drought might continue, challenges would certainly persist, but they faced the future differently now, not as isolated individuals struggling against implacable systems, but as citizens empowered to reshape those systems for the common good. Outside, stars emerged in the clearing sky, their light traveling across vast distances to reach this small farm, where democracy had been quietly preserved and dramatically revealed. The same patient illumination would guide the difficult work ahead, implementing safeguards against oligarchy while preserving legitimate enterprise, balancing efficiency with accountability, proving that government of the people could still function in an interconnected world. The constitutional safeguard protocols weren't magic solutions to complex problems. They were tools requiring wisdom, restraint, and constant democratic engagement to use effectively. But they offered what desperate citizens had lacked for decades: meaningful ways to challenge concentrated power and restore public influence over public policy. As the Bennetts prepared for bed, each carrying new purpose from their day's discussions, Marcus made a final check of the bunker security systems. The cyber attacks had been repelled, the documents were safely preserved, and implementation processes were beginning. His grandfather's patient vigil was ending just as a new chapter of democratic participation was beginning. The farm would endure, the family would endure, and perhaps, with wisdom and determination equal to the challenges ahead, the Republic would not just endure, but thrive, renewed by citizens who chose principle over profit when the moment demanded it. Tomorrow would bring new tests, corporate adaptations and political complexities. But tonight, in a farmhouse that had sheltered 4 generations of Bennetts, a family that had risked everything for democracy's future slept peacefully, knowing they'd honored their inheritance and secured their children's legacy. The last light in the house flickered off, leaving only the subtle glow of bunker security monitors and the eternal stars, patient witnesses to democracy's ongoing experiment in balancing power, principle, and the endless possibility of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when history calls. 6 months after the Bennett farm bunker revealed its secrets to the world, the landscape of American democracy had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. Marcus stood before the House Judiciary Committee, preparing to testify about the ongoing implementation of the constitutional safeguard protocols. The wood-paneled chamber, with its solemn atmosphere and weight of history, seemed an unlikely destination for a farmer who'd once measured success in bushels and rainfall. Behind him in the gallery sat Sarah, their children, and dozens of supporters from Cedar Ridge Valley. Their presence reminded him that this journey had never been solely about the Bennett family, but about communities across America reclaiming their voice in governance. Emma, now 13 and already being courted by prestigious technology programs, watched the proceedings with the fierce intelligence that had helped expose the coalition's cyber attacks. Lucas, his health stabilized thanks to consistent treatment, made possible by their newfound stability, sketched the scene in a notebook, capturing democracy in action through a child's eyes. Committee Chairman Reynolds gavelled the session to order, his weathered face showing the strain of shepherding revolutionary legislation through a system designed for incremental change. Mr. Bennett, you've submitted written testimony about your family's role in preserving and revealing the Lincoln Commission documents. Today, we'd like to focus on the practical challenges of implementation. Can you speak to the resistance you've encountered? Marcus adjusted the microphone, remembering his grandfather's advice about speaking truth to power, clearly, calmly, and without apology. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The resistance has been sophisticated and multifaceted. While groups like the Continuity Coalition can no longer operate in complete shadow, they've adapted their tactics. Legal challenges have been filed in 17 states. Corporate lobbying expenditures have tripled. New think tanks have emerged overnight, all arguing that the protocols represent government overreach that will stifle innovation and harm economic growth. Representative Martinez, a freshman congresswoman who'd run on a platform of corporate accountability, leaned forward. Can you provide specific examples of this resistance? Marcus pulled out a folder containing documents his team had compiled. 3 weeks ago, a consortium of international banks threatened to downgrade U.S. credit ratings if the protocols were fully implemented. Media conglomerates have launched coordinated editorial campaigns painting the safeguards as anti-business extremism, 7 state legislatures have introduced bills to exempt their territories from federal oversight mechanisms established by the protocols. The examples painted a picture of entrenched power fighting to maintain its advantages. But Marcus also shared stories of progress. Communities using new transparency requirements to expose corporate capture of local government. Small businesses successfully challenging anti-competitive practices previously protected by international arbitration agreements. Citizens groups accessing information about private military contractor activities in their regions. The protocols aren't a magic solution, Marcus emphasized. They're tools that require active citizenship to function effectively. My grandfather understood this. He didn't just preserve documents. He preserved the idea that democracy demands participation, not passive consumption of governance by distant interests. Representative Thompson, known for his corporate sympathies, interrupted with barely concealed hostility. Mr. Bennett, critics argue that your family's actions have disrupted beneficial relationships between private enterprise and government. Sovereign industries alone employed thousands of Americans. Its bankruptcy, triggered by your revelations, cost jobs and shareholder value. How do you respond to accusations that idealistic meddling has caused real economic harm? The question echoed arguments Marcus had heard repeatedly, that challenging concentrated power somehow threatened prosperity itself. He thought of his neighbors in Cedar Ridge Valley, whose economic struggles predated any protocol implementation caused by the very systems now being reformed. Representative Thompson, sovereign industry's business model depended on perpetual conflict and the privatization of traditional government functions. Its contracts incentivized military engagement over diplomatic solutions. The jobs it provided came at the cost of democratic oversight and often supported operations that contradicted stated American values. We should indeed care about employment, but not at the expense of constitutional governance. Sarah, watching from the gallery, allowed herself a small smile. Her husband had found his voice in these forums, transforming from reluctant participant to articulate advocate for democratic renewal. The man who'd once measured himself by failed businesses and financial struggles now stood as a symbol of citizen engagement triumphing over systemic corruption. The hearing continued through the morning, with Marcus fielding questions about implementation timelines, international responses, and the ongoing role of citizens in protocol oversight. He spoke of town halls in rural communities where farmers debated complex policy implications, of technology workers creating open-source tools to track corporate influence on legislation, of teachers incorporating civic engagement into curricula neglected for decades. During a recess, Director Chen approached Marcus in the corridor outside the hearing room. Her expression carried the mixture of exhaustion and determination that had become familiar to everyone involved in protocol implementation. The President's signing ceremony for the constitutional amendment is confirmed for next week, she reported. Your family's attendance has been specifically requested. It's largely because of your grandfather's foresight and your courage that we've reached this point. Marcus nodded, though the prospect of such visibility still felt surreal. Any updates on the coalition's latest maneuvers? Chen's expression darkened. Intelligence suggests they're shifting focus from direct resistance to long-term subversion. Think tank papers advocating for modernized interpretations of the protocols, academic conferences questioning their historical authenticity, gradual regulatory capture of the oversight mechanisms themselves. They're playing a generational game now, hoping public attention will wane over time. It was exactly what Walter Bennett's journal had warned about, the coalition's patient approach to power, thinking in decades while democratic attention spans measured in election cycles. Marcus thought of Emma and Lucas, of the world they would inherit, and felt renewed determination to see the protocols not just implemented, but but institutionally entrenched. The afternoon session brought unexpected testimony from Carlton Blackwood, the Global Strategic Council representative who'd attempted to buy Marcus's cooperation months earlier. His appearance surprised everyone, including the committee members, who hadn't listed him on the official agenda. "I appear today not as an opponent of the protocols, but as a convert to their necessity," Blackwood began, his polished delivery unchanged, though his message had transformed completely. "My organization initially viewed these safeguards as threats to legitimate business interests. We've since recognized that sustainable commerce requires genuine democratic stability, not the illusion of order maintained through corporate dominance." The reversal stunned the gallery. Marcus studied Blackwood carefully, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motive. But the man's testimony proved substantive, detailing how international business communities were adapting to new transparency requirements and finding unexpected benefits in operating within genuinely democratic frameworks rather than captured systems. "The Zurich Accords, which I once defended, created perverse incentives," Blackwood admitted. "Corporations pursued regulatory arbitrage rather than innovation, seeking friendly venues for disputes rather than fair resolutions. The protocols force us to compete on merit rather than influence. It's harder, but ultimately healthier for both business and society." During the next break, Marcus found Blackwood in the hallway. "Why the change of heart?" he asked directly. Blackwood's diplomatic smile had been replaced by something more genuine. "Your grandfather's documents included correspondence I hadn't seen before. Letters between CEOs in the 1960s discussing how to manage democracy rather than operate within it. Reading their casual dismissal of public interest in favor of private profit was illuminating. I realized I'd spent my career serving a system that viewed citizens as obstacles rather than stakeholders. The conversion might have been strategic, but its effects were real." Blackwood's testimony carried weight with international business communities, fragmenting what had been unified corporate resistance to the protocols. The coalition's monolithic facade was cracking as some members recognized that sustainable profits required genuine social license, not manufactured consent. As hearings concluded, the Bennett family retreated to their hotel suite overlooking the Capitol. The modest rooms felt luxurious compared to their recent struggles, though Marcus noticed his children remained unchanged by their newfound prominence. Emma helped Lucas with his homework, while Sarah reviewed medical journals, maintaining the routines that had sustained them through crisis. "Dad, there's something you should see," Emma called from her laptop. She'd maintained monitoring systems that tracked digital discussions about the protocols, identifying emerging narratives and potential threats. Someone leaked internal coalition communications from 2019. They knew about Grandpa's bunker, had narrowed potential locations to 3 properties, including ours. Marcus joined her at the screen, reading through documents that revealed the coalition's systematic search for commission sites. They'd used shell companies to purchase surrounding properties, employed ground-penetrating radar disguised as agricultural surveys, and even attempted to access military records through congressional allies. "They were so close," Emma continued. "But look at this final assessment. Bennett property shows no unusual signatures. Family financial distress suggests ignorance of any valuable assets. Recommend focusing resources on Vermont site." The miscalculation that had preserved their grandfather's secret struck Marcus with fresh appreciation for Walter's precautions. By maintaining the appearance of an ordinary struggling farm, by never accessing the bunker's resources even during personal hardship, the old man had protected the protocols until the moment was right for revelation. Sarah set aside her journals, joining the family discussion. They underestimated the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, just like they're underestimating us now, assuming public attention will fade and implementation will falter. Her observation crystallized something Marcus had been grasping toward throughout the day's testimony. The protocol's true power lay not in their legal mechanisms, but in their activation of civic engagement. By revealing that concentrated private power had systematically subverted democratic governance, they'd awakened a vigilance that couldn't easily be lulled back to sleep. That evening, Marcus received a call that would have seemed impossible. 6 months earlier, President Williams herself requesting a private meeting before the signing ceremony. The invitation specified family welcome, suggesting an informal conversation rather than official briefing. The Oval Office, despite its ceremonial grandeur, felt surprisingly intimate as the Bennett family was ushered in the following morning. President Williams rose from behind the resolute desk, her warm greeting putting them at ease despite the historic circumstances. "I wanted to thank you personally," she began, gesturing for them to sit in the conversation area near the fireplace. "Not just for preserving the protocols, but for the example you've set. Your choice of principle over profit has resonated across party lines, reminding Americans that citizenship requires sacrifice." Lucas, overwhelmed by the setting, whispered to his mother. Sarah smiled, encouraging him to speak. "The president asked you a question, sweetheart." "I was wondering," the boy said hesitantly, "what happens if bad people try to hide everything again, like they did with Grandpa's bunker?" President Williams knelt to Lucas's eye level, her expression serious. "Despite his youth, that's exactly the right question. The amendment we're signing creates multiple redundancies, no single point of failure like before. But more importantly, people like your family have shown others how to stay vigilant. Democracy's immune system has been activated." The metaphor resonated with Sarah's medical background. "Exposure to a pathogen creates antibodies," she observed. "The coalition's overreach has inoculated a generation against complacency about corporate influence." The president nodded appreciatively. "Your grandfather understood this. His journal entries, which I've read thoroughly, show remarkable foresight about both threats and remedies. He didn't just preserve defensive measures but offensive capabilities, ways for citizens to proactively challenge concentrated power." She moved to her desk, retrieving a leather portfolio. "Which brings me to why I really wanted to meet privately. The protocols establish a new oversight body, the Democratic Integrity Commission. It needs leadership that understands both the historical context and contemporary challenges. Marcus, I'd like you to consider serving as its inaugural chair." The offer stunned Marcus into momentary silence. Emma filled the gap with characteristic directness. He'd be perfect for it. Dad's shown he can stand up to pressure while bringing people together. Plus, he actually reads all those boring government documents. Her assessment broke the tension, earning laughter even from the president. But Marcus felt the weight of decisions settling on him again. The position would mean relocating to Washington, leaving the farm that had been in his family for generations, accepting public scrutiny that would affect his children's lives. "I need to discuss this with my family," he said finally. "Of course," President Williams agreed, "but understand that this isn't just about administrative oversight. The commission will need to build institutional culture from scratch, establishing traditions of independence and public service that can outlast any individual administration. Your grandfather spent 40 years protecting an idea. This position would let you help that idea take institutional form." Walking back through the White House grounds, the Bennett family processed the unexpected turn. Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand, her support evident without words. Emma walked slightly ahead, her quick mind already analyzing implications. Lucas held his father's other hand, his trust absolute, despite not fully understanding the decision's magnitude. "We don't have to decide immediately," Sarah said as they reached their car. "But think about what Grandpa would say. He didn't preserve those documents so they could sit in archives. He wanted them used to protect democracy for families like ours. That evening, Marcus sat alone in the hotel room, reading his grandfather's journal one more time. The familiar handwriting spoke across decades, offering guidance for choices Walter couldn't have specifically anticipated. Power concentrates naturally, like water finding the lowest point. Democratic systems must constantly pump it back upward, distributing it among citizens. This requires both good machinery, laws, institutions, protocols, and dedicated operators, engaged citizens, honest officials, watchful journalists. When I'm gone, others must tend the pumps. The work never ends, but neither does its importance. The decision crystallized as Marcus read. His grandfather had sacrificed personal comfort for public good across 4 decades. The position offered to Marcus represented not burden, but opportunity, a chance to help build institutions that could protect democracy for generations. The next morning, as the family prepared for the signing ceremony, Marcus called President Williams to accept the position. The conversation was brief but meaningful, setting in motion changes that would relocate the Bennetts to Washington while maintaining their connection to Cedar Ridge Valley. The farm would be preserved as a historical site, its significance extending beyond family legacy to national symbolism. The signing ceremony took place in the East Room, with congressional leaders, Supreme Court justices, and selected citizens filling the ornate space. Marcus and his family sat in the front row as President Williams addressed the nation. Today, we strengthen our democracy not through expansion of government power, but through reinforcement of citizen oversight. The 28th Amendment, which I'm about to sign, doesn't create new authority, but prevents its capture by private interests. We do this because Americans like the Bennett family reminded us that eternal vigilance remains freedom's price. As the president signed the amendment with multiple ceremonial pens, cameras captured the historic moment. But Marcus found himself thinking about quieter victories, neighbors supporting each other through hardship, communities refusing to surrender their voice to distant boardrooms, ordinary citizens choosing principle when profit beckoned. After the ceremony, as the Bennetts mingled with dignitaries and advocates, coalition representatives approached one final time. They offered no bribes now, no threats or legal challenges. Instead, they sought dialogue about operating within the new framework, adapting to transparency requirements, competing fairly rather than through influence. The conversations felt different, less adversarial, more constructive. Democracy's antibodies were working. Emma found her father during a quiet moment, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. I've been thinking about Grandpa's journal, about how he knew exactly when to reveal the protocols. He waited until corporate power became so obvious that people would understand the threat. But he also waited until citizens were desperate enough to act on that understanding. Her insight captured something profound about democratic timing. Reforms arrived not through abstract idealism, but through lived experience of system failure. The Bennett's personal crisis, financial ruin, medical bills, impossible choices had mirrored millions of similar stories. Their response had catalyzed collective action precisely because it emerged from shared struggle rather than privileged position. As the day's events concluded, the family walked through Washington's evening streets. Cherry blossoms bloomed early, their pale pink petals drifting like snow through unseasonably warm air. Climate change continued its inexorable advance, one of many challenges requiring democratic response to global threats. The real work starts now, Marcus observed, watching tourists photograph the illuminated monuments. Implementation, oversight, building institutional habits that outlast initial enthusiasm. Sarah nodded, her medical training again providing useful metaphors. Lifestyle changes are harder than emergency interventions, Preventing disease requires daily choices, not just dramatic surgeries. Lucas, walking between his parents, looked up with the directness children possess before learning diplomatic circumlocution. Will the bad people just give up now? Marcus considered his son's question, thinking of Chen's warnings about generational struggle, of the coalition's patient approach to power. No, buddy. They'll adapt, find new ways to concentrate influence. But now more people are watching, and we have better tools to push back. It's like your immune system. You don't beat illness once and never get sick again. You stay healthy by constantly maintaining your defenses. The simple explanation satisfied Lucas, but its implications resonated more deeply with Marcus. Democratic health required constant maintenance, not occasional heroic interventions. His new role would involve building systems for that maintenance, creating institutional habits that could persist through changing administrations and shifting public attention. Months later, as the Bennett family settled into their new Washington life, the Democratic Integrity Commission began its work. Marcus assembled a team that balanced expertise with independence, combining former corporate insiders like Blackwood with grassroots organizers who understood power's effects on ordinary communities. The Commission's first report documented implementation progress while identifying emerging threats, new forms of influence peddling that tested protocol boundaries, international coordination attempting to circumvent national reforms, sophisticated propaganda campaigns disguised as academic research. Emma, enrolled in advanced programs while maintaining her monitoring systems, flagged patterns that seasoned analysts missed. Her youth prevented the cynicism that sometimes blinded experts to novel threats. Lucas, healthy and thriving with consistent medical care, became an unconscious symbol of why the fight mattered. A child whose life had nearly been sacrificed to profit-driven healthcare could now pursue his artistic talents without that shadow. Sarah returned to pediatric medicine, her experience navigating personal medical crisis informing her approach to systemic healthcare reform. She testified before congressional committees about the intersection of corporate medicine and democratic governance, showing how concentrated power affected the most intimate aspects of citizens' lives. The farm in Cedar Ridge Valley transformed into a museum and educational center, its humble buildings preserved exactly as they'd been when Marcus made his desperate discovery. Visitors could descend into the bunker, now publicly accessible, to see where 3 presidents had hidden democracy's insurance policy. But the site's most powerful exhibit remained the kitchen table where a struggling family had chosen principle over profit, setting in motion changes that reached far beyond their personal circumstances. Director Chen, now overseeing protocol, implementation across federal agencies, visited regularly to coordinate with Marcus's commission. Their meetings often occurred at the farm, connecting policy discussions to the physical space where hidden safeguards had been revealed. The location served as a constant reminder that democratic protection emerged from citizen courage, not institutional inertia. The coalition's adapting faster than we anticipated, Chen reported during one such meeting. They're creating new types of organizations, benefit corporations, social enterprises, stakeholder trusts that blur traditional lines between public and private interest. Some genuinely embrace reform. Others use progressive language to mask traditional influence-seeking. Marcus studied her analysis, recognizing the challenge of distinguishing authentic adaptation from sophisticated camouflage. Grandpa's journal warned about this. He wrote that power learns to speak whatever language keeps it safe. We need to evaluate actions, not rhetoric. The observation reflected hard-won wisdom about democracy's ongoing negotiation with private power. The protocols hadn't eliminated corporate influence, but forced it into more transparent channels. Citizens could now see the flow of money through politics, track the revolving door between industry and regulation, access information about lobbying efforts and their outcomes. Sunlight disinfected some corruption while forcing other infections deeper, requiring constant vigilance to expose. As the first anniversary of the bunker's discovery approached, media outlets prepared retrospectives on democracy's unlikely renewal. Journalists interviewed the Bennett family, government officials, corporate representatives, and citizens whose lives had been affected by protocol implementation. The coverage revealed both progress and ongoing challenges. Communities successfully challenging corporate overreach, but also sophisticated efforts to weaken oversight mechanisms through bureaucratic erosion rather than direct assault. Marcus addressed the National Press Club, his speech connecting his grandfather's patient preservation to contemporary vigilance requirements. Walter Bennett understood that democracy faces two types of threat: dramatic assaults that mobilize, immediate response, and slow erosion that escapes notice until the foundation crumbles. The protocols address both, but only if citizens remain engaged with their operation. The message resonated beyond policy circles, reaching Americans who'd grown cynical about their influence on governance. Town halls reported increased attendance. Local elections saw higher turnout. Citizens demanded transparency from institutions that had operated in comfortable obscurity. The shift wasn't universal or uniform, but it marked a measurable change in civic engagement. Emma, now 14 and splitting time between accelerated education and commission work, published her first academic paper analyzing digital influence networks. Her research exposed how seemingly independent online communities were actually coordinated to shape political narratives, revealing coalition adaptation to new communication environments. The work earned recognition from technology institutes and democracy advocates alike, positioning her as a next-generation voice in ongoing struggles over information integrity. Lucas contributed differently, his artistic talents producing illustrations that made complex concepts accessible to younger audiences. His graphic novel about the bunker discovery, titled Grandpa's Secret, became required reading in civics classes nationwide, the simple narrative of family courage resonating with children who would inherit democracy's ongoing challenges. Sarah's medical practice evolved to include policy advocacy, connecting healthcare delivery to broader democratic concerns. She testified about pharmaceutical companies' influence on treatment protocols, insurance industry lobbying that shaped coverage decisions, and the human cost when profit motives overrode medical judgment. Her dual perspective as healthcare provider and patient advocate brought credibility to reform efforts. The family's transformation from desperate circumstances to national influence provided a powerful narrative about democratic possibility. But Marcus consistently emphasized that their story reflected collective rather than individual achievement. The neighbors who'd supported them, the officials who'd chosen duty over convenience, the citizens who'd demanded better from their institutions, all had contributed to democracy's reinforcement. Standing again at the farm's kitchen window, exactly 1 year after his desperate drilling had uncovered the bunker, Marcus reflected on the journey. The drought had finally broken, regular rainfall returning to Cedar Ridge Valley through natural cycles rather than corporate manipulation. Farmers throughout the region reported improved yields, small businesses were recovering from years of unfair competition, and communities were reconnecting with democratic processes that had seemed hopelessly distant. The view through the window had changed subtly but significantly. The bunker entrance was now properly marked, tour groups regularly visiting what had become a symbol of citizen vigilance. The old barn displayed educational materials about the Lincoln Commission and its modern relevance. Gardens, demonstrated sustainable practices that embodied the protocol's integration of private initiative with public good. But the most important change wasn't visible. It lived in the countless citizens who now understood their role in democracy's maintenance, who recognized that freedom required active protection from concentrated power, who chose engagement over cynicism when confronted with systemic challenges. Marcus thought of his grandfather, of the patient decades Walter had spent protecting documents that might never have been needed. The old man's faith in future generations had been validated, his careful preservation enabling democratic renewal at precisely the moment when private power had overreached sufficiently to awaken public response. A car approached along the gravel. Drive, new visitors coming to learn from the Bennett farm's unlikely history. Marcus prepared to greet them, to share the story of how a desperate father's search for water had uncovered democracy's hidden defenses. But more importantly, he would emphasize that the work continued, that each generation must tend the machinery of self-governance, that ordinary citizens doing extraordinary things remained freedom's most reliable guardians. The constitutional safeguard protocols were now law, their implementation proceeding despite ongoing resistance. The Democratic Integrity Commission operated with increasing effectiveness, building institutional knowledge about how private power sought to capture public policy. Citizens across America engaged more actively with their democracy, understanding that its health required constant attention rather than periodic intervention. But Marcus knew, as his grandfather had known, that this victory was temporary. Power would continue seeking concentration, private interests would adapt to new constraints, and democratic vigilance would face inevitable fatigue. The struggle between oligarchy and democracy was eternal, written into the nature of human organization itself. What had changed was awareness. The coalition's overreach had awakened a generation to threats their parents had ignored. The protocols provided tools for resistance, but tools required willing hands to wield them. The Bennett family's choice had demonstrated that such hands existed, that principle could triumph over profit when citizens remembered their power. As evening approached, bringing another tour group to hear the democracy's preservation, Marcus felt the satisfaction of duty fulfilled and work ongoing. The farm endured, the family thrived. The Republic continued its endless experiment in self-governance, strengthened by citizens who chose vigilance over comfort, community over isolation, hope over cynicism. Walter Bennett's patient vigil had ended. Marcus Bennett's careful stewardship had begun. And somewhere in America, other citizens were making similar choices, tending democracy's machinery with the quiet dedication that freedom had always required and always would. The protocols were just the beginning. The real safeguard remained. What it had always been: citizens willing to sacrifice for the common good, to choose principle when profit beckoned, to stand watch when others slept. Democracy's true defense lay not in hidden bunkers, but in awakened hearts, not in secret documents, but in public courage, not in institutional mechanisms, but in human character tested and proved sufficient to the moment's demands. The Bennett family had passed that test. Now it was America's turn to demonstrate whether a democracy renewed could become a democracy sustained, whether the awakening prompted by one family's courage could evolve into the sustained vigilance that freedom required, whether the ordinary citizens could continue doing the extraordinary things that history sometimes demanded and always remembered. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.